For years it's been on the downward spiral, but in recent weeks the descent has only gathered pace. Somalia's police chief and security minister are now both dead. Civilians are still being killed as the rebels appear to wrest more control from the government. Somalia and the endless fight for power. This is Inside Story. Hello there, I'm Kamal Santamaria. It's around a month since we've discussed Somalia here on Inside Story, and in that time, things have only gotten worse. The fighting has again escalated, particularly in Mogadishu. The civilian death toll keeps rising with it. More than 120,000 people have been displaced this month alone. And all the while, the international community looks on somewhat indifferently. But as if to prove that this isn't just random fighting in a lawless land, Mogadishu's police chief, the Somali security minister and the former ambassador to Ethiopia were all killed inside 2 days. And so the inevitable question arises, what next? Let's refresh things first with a look on the map, though. Just a month ago, we were talking about the town of Jowhar, considered a government stronghold until Al-Shabaab fighters took over. That was May 17th. Now we're looking at Beledweyne, where these latest high-profile killings have happened, along with 50 other deaths, we should mention. Beledweyne was held by the government until the end of last year, when it too was taken by Al-Shabaab. But of course, all eyes remain on the capital, Mogadishu. It's seen pretty much constant fighting. And in the last 48 hours, at least 17 people were killed in an attack on a mosque in the city. We'll introduce our guests for today in just a moment's time. First, this report from Mohammed Shakir.
Advance and retreat. This has been the theme in and around the Somali capital. After fierce fighting, the Somali government forces recaptured key positions from the opposition Islamic Party in the south of Mogadishu, only to lose them again after a few hours. With fierce fighting every day in Mogadishu, no attention has been paid to the civilians who fall victim in the crossfire. This is Tarboon Square in southern Mogadishu, the scene of the latest clashes, where the Mogadishu chief of police has been killed. During the last month, more than 250 people have been killed and 120,000 have been displaced.
We do not wish to continue fighting our brothers. We extend our hands for dialogue, but they refused. So we are fighting them. We want to achieve security and stability, but they do not want the good of the country.
The intense fighting shows how desperate the government is and the sizable threat posed by the Islamic opposition Al-Shabaab fighters after capturing a number of vital positions, including army weapons and machinery, as they continue to spread their influence over the capital suburbs, securing their presence in the city of Jowhar.
There is no such thing as the Islamic courts anymore. They are an extension of the former Abdul Yusuf regime. They said they are a national unity government, but have stepped in the shoes of the former regime, and these are their captured vehicles used by the former regime as well.
As fighting continues, many more civilians are likely to be killed. They are paying the price of a failed government and the failure of the international community in a neglected country. Mohammed Shakir for Inside Story.
All right, let's bring in our guests now to discuss this situation in Somalia. Zakaria Mahmoud Haj Abdi, he is the Deputy Chairman of the Alliance for the Re-Liberation of Somalia. He's in London, as you can see. Also in London is Dominic Helling, a Research Associate at the Crisis States Research Centre. That's at the London School of Economics. And rounding out our panel in Washington, D.C. is Abdul Qadir Abdirahman, a leading member of Somali Cause, a coalition of groups working to promote stability in Somalia. Gentlemen, thank you for your time. Before we get into our discussion, let's hear quickly from the Somali President, Sheikh Sharif Ahmed, commenting on these latest killings in Beledweyne on Thursday.
I sent my condolences to the relatives of the victims, including Minister Omar Hashi Adam and Ambassador Abdul Karim. This was a suicide attack against officials. This country, Somalia, has been invaded by terrorists who do not want the Somali flag to fly over this nation. They want to make it a safe haven for criminals. This is an international war against Somalis. We ask the world to help us fight the international terrorists.
Zakaria Mahmoud in London, let me start with you. We hear the President of Somalia, they're talking about international terrorists, asking the world to help us fight international terrorists. He's effectively talking about the people who he used to be with, is he not?
It's a sad thing. It's a sad thing, really. Let me try to summarize some of the TFG's political record since its inception in February this year. First of all, they brought a new dimension of death, destruction, and displacement of tens of thousands of Somali people. They have literally franchised the national resources and sometimes a total sellout of the national resources and national sovereignty. For instance, they have signed an agreement with the Kenyan government giving away a large portion of our territorial waters, and they have also authorized to the Kenyan government to collect the taxes and the national revenue of Somalia. Thirdly,
okay, go ahead.
Thirdly, they are now saying the Ethiopians must come and reoccupy Somalia. They have given a free license to the Ugandan and Burundi contingent in Mogadishu to kill and maim and displace the Somali people. This is incomprehensible. I mean,
but let's be absolutely fair here. Let me jump in 1 second.
New war of religious and clan conflict.
Okay, but what about what happened in Beledweyne on Thursday? The Somali security minister is killed. The former ambassador to Ethiopia is killed, and rebel groups have taken complete responsibility for it. There is no way that the government is the only side involved here, and there's no way that the rebels are blameless.
Look, I'm not here to condone or to applaud for people who have been killed. I mean, it's very sad Somalis kill each other. This is not the way I've been brought up. This is not the way Somalis want. What we want is a stable Somalia, a sovereign Somalia, free from the Ethiopian influence, free from the occupation, and free from the stooges, Ethiopian stooges and puppets. This is what we want. We do not want to kill our brothers and sisters each other. This is really very sad.
Let's bring in Abdul Qadir in Washington, D.C. for some comment from there. If we're staying with this latest incident and remembering the Mogadishu police chief, I think it was, who was killed as well on Wednesday. I mean, it's as we've heard already, it's very sad that this is happening, that Somalis are killing Somalis, but it shows that Al-Shabaab particularly is a very organised group and is able to target quite high up in the ranks of the TFG.
Let me first send my condolences and the condolences and the rest of the Somali diaspora in the United States and Canada, who have been calling me all morning to send their condolences to the people of Somalia and also to the people of Iran and the unity government. What happened in Beledweyne is a very tragic, and it's the suicide behavior. It's an outside intervention. Is not part of the Somali culture. It's not part of Somali tradition, and we condemn it. The discussion that was Mr. Zakaria has just described a lot of issues, but when it comes to Beledweyne, where the attack was perpetrated by a specific group, I'm not hearing a condemnation. So what I would like to know is from Zakaria whether he condemns of what happened, and that's what the government has been trying to bring people onto the table and to initiate discussion and negotiations. But the opposition, they seem to be taking in the wrong side of just fight, and they are the only people who have declared openly that they do not want to get in dialogue with the government, and they want to keep fighting. So the misery that we have today is how can we stop the violence in Somalia, and the only solution that's on the table is through negotiations and discussions.
Zakaria Mahmood, very quick reaction from you, because you were asked a question there. I'd like to bring Dominic into the conversation, but just a quick reply from you.
I think we are not in a session of question and answer. Here we're talking about the broader picture of the Somali problem. Killing Somali, I have said already, killing Somali by Somali people is a tragic thing, and I do not want this to happen. But here you have a government which calls its people, divides its people, calls part of its people as terrorists, as Mr. Sharif was just saying, and this alienation and this exclusion causes all this havoc and all this fighting and all this killing. I'm sorry, Mr. Abdul Qadir, to call this government as a government. This was a project elaborately established by Wald Abdallah in Djibouti, and they have no any legitimacy whatsoever, whether it's public or legitimate, legal, or traditional. I mean, even they haven't come in power by coup d'etat. These people, they have just parachuted in Mogadishu and claimed themselves that they are the government.
Okay, then.
We know that they are stooges of Ethiopia. We know that they are calling the international community and the foreigners to come in Somalia and kill more people and occupy the country, and we do not want our country to be occupied.
Okay, let's bring Dominic Helling into the conversation, who's been waiting over in our London studio. And I think there's an interesting point which Zakaria raised there, and that's the legitimacy of this government. And I want to focus particularly on the president, who we heard from already. A lot of pressure, I think, was placed on him because he was a former rebel, a former member of the Islamic Courts Union, and that he could actually make some difference. The fact is, he hasn't really in that time. Was he ever going to?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Kamal, for having me in this panel.
You're welcome.
Sure, there were high hopes that were put into Sheikh Sharif as leading a new unity government into a more peaceful and more stable Somalia. Yet the renewed fighting in Somalia shows that those hopes were pitched up pretty high. It maybe should be said that those new fightings do not come as a complete surprise, as the TFG, the Transitional Federal Government as it stands right now since about 3.5 months only, finds itself in a very weak and feeble position. They don't have much to offer to the opposition parties. The only thing, for example, they could offer to Dahir Awais, who's the head of Hizbul Islam, was to negotiate getting him off the list of terrorists from the United States. But other than that, the government is in a pretty weak position of negotiation. They don't hold much territory in the country. The military forces are weak and also quite fragmented into four different sectors.
The one thing the government has offered, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is an offer to unconditionally talk with any group that wants to come and talk, and yet none of those groups have taken up that offer. Why?
That's absolutely right. Very good question. I mean, while the government has offered unconditional talks, both major opposition movements have declined to take up those offers, although there are reports coming in that at least Hizbul Islam is going to have talks, renewed talks on a peace deal with the TFG. Some officials from Hizbul Islam have denied that, but other sources clearly state that there seem to be negotiations going on very shortly, and that gives us more hope to establish peace and security in the country, I guess.
So Dominic Helling there mentioned a group there called Hizbul Islam, so it's probably a good chance for us just to remind viewers about some of the major players in this particularly bloody power struggle at the moment. We've talked about Al-Shabaab a lot, an anti-government militant group that split from the Islamic Courts Union and now controls most of southern Somalia and pretty much wants to impose Sharia across the country, Islamic law. There are other militant groups fighting the government as well as each other. We've heard there about this recently formed Hizbul Islam group that backs attacking African Union troops, as well as the Ethiopian-based Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, if I've pronounced that properly. Outsiders as well, who are historically involved in Somali affairs. In 2006, Ethiopian troops were sent to Somalia to help the struggling government. The last of their tanks pulled out in January, but this is important actually. Ethiopia has admitted military personnel have been back since then to carry out, quote, reconnaissance missions. And Eritrea is also alleged to have a hand in arming Somali rebels, although the government there denies that. Abdul Qadir in Washington, D.C., let's go back to this point about Ethiopia, because it's supposed to have left, and yet there are these reports of Ethiopia, and the Ethiopians admitting themselves, reports of them coming back in. Now, Ethiopia was seen by many as a destabilising force in Somalia. It can't be helpful that they are sort of still on the fringes there when Somalia needs to sort out its own problems.
I agree. Just for your information, that Somali Cause organizations was established just to bring the attention of the plight of Somali people during the Ethiopian occupation to the U.S. government and to the Canadian government, and we have worked very hard to the halls of Congress to convince them, and we wrote letters to make sure the Ethiopians leave, because the presence of Ethiopia have radicalized our community, and we do not want the frontline states, especially Kenya and Ethiopia, to meddle and interfere the internal affairs of Somalia. So our position has been always very clear. But to come back to the legitimacy of the government, both majority of Somalis, both outside and inside, support this unity government. Of course, there are some technical mistakes that the government has committed, but that does not justify to take arms against this government. What this government have tried since it came to power is to initiate dialogue and discussion.
But that support, forgive me for interrupting you, that support which you talk about doesn't necessarily translate into a strong government. You said you don't want the Kenyans and the Ethiopians meddling in Somali politics, but the fact is the Somali government on its own is very weak and in some way probably still needs that outside help.
I agree that what we are calling for is the UN peacekeeping force, mainly from Muslim countries. Definitely, the security of Somalia must be restored. What Somali people need is a governance. They need a system of government. They are sick and tired of 20 years of lack of law and order. So the only way to achieve that is to train Somali force with the help and assistance from the international community, mainly from the Muslim countries. And that's why the United Nations or the UN or the international community actually has failed to deliver what is pledged, whether it's financial, whether it's military support to the government. So first, the government should and must insist on keeping on the peacekeeping and keeping on the discussion and dialogue open. And I think they have given up that quickly, and I encourage them to go back to the table. But then we have one group, and as you were hearing from Zakaria, that they do not want to dialogue with the government. The government has accepted the Sharia. That is the paramount for all Somalis. Anything after that is secondary. When the AMISOM forces have to depart, that can be negotiated, that can be discussed. Why do we have to fight? And you know that Mogadishu, there's not a specified battleground. Mogadishu is in a residential area, so when people fight, whether it's from the government or from the insurgents, who are dying, who are losing their lives are the civilians. So what we are calling for is a peaceful negotiation to end the suffering of Somali people. And I would like Mr. Zakaria to commit to that. He opened the dialogue with the government.
And I'm going to come back to Mr. Zakaria in a moment. What I want to do first is pick up on the point you made about the United Nations, because we need to look at the role of the international community in all of this. It has very much been accused of having only limited involvement with restoring peace, or at least attempting to restore peace. Start with the UN, as we've been talking about it, which recently called on anti-government troops to end the fighting, but UN peacekeepers are yet to be deployed, as we've heard, as some member states are less than enthusiastic about deploying to the country. There's also the European Union, which has pledged more than $250 million to help finance the African Union forces already in the country and to strengthen Somali security forces. But it is those African Union forces, and their mission is known as AMISOM, which comes under the most pressure inevitably. It's struggling to do its job without a coherent security solution on the ground, but has still had its mandate renewed for another 7 months. Plus, it's been accused by Somali fighters of indiscriminate firing against civilians, which has put the microscope firmly on AMISOM's rules of engagement. Zakaria Mahmood in London, we'll come back to you for this part of the show when we talk about the international community, because I guess the sticking point for the rebels, as far as the UN or the African Union or any forces coming in, is that they don't want any international forces in Somalia, and that's understandable. But is there not an understanding also that these troops would be there to help, to try to bring peace, even though they are outsiders? They are there to do a good job.
No, they're not. Look,
because?
Gentlemen, hello?
No, I'm just asking you why they're not doing a job. Why are they not there to do a good job?
They are not doing their job. Actually, what they are doing is totally an opposite of what they have supposed to do. We know that there are principles and laws and regulations for the peacekeepers. Peacekeepers must be a neutral force. They should not support or be part of any conflict. These guys in Mogadishu actually clearly and openly they defend so-called TFG against the Somali people, against their own people. Now, they have committed crimes against Somali people. They have killed, maimed, and displaced thousands and thousands of Somali people. They are shelling Somali people indiscriminately on daily basis.
Surely that's not their mission, though.
These are not peacekeepers. Actually, these are occupiers. Number two, I totally disagree with Abdul Qadir that most of the Somalis are with this government. There is no, this government, if they have a base, a public base, they wouldn't need any foreign troops to guard them. And at the same time, let me give you a historical background of what happened. We were in Asmara. We have been fighting against the Ethiopian occupation. Mr. Wald Abdullah came and divided us into two. He split us into two, and he called some of us spoilers and troublemakers, and the others are legitimate government. That's the whole picture. There is no government here. There is a bunch of people who are actually stooges of the Ethiopians, the same people and the same government and troops that we have been fighting against them. Now, what we need is, the solution is to have, go to back to the basics. We need to have a proper national reconciliation conference, an exclusive, broad-based national reconciliation conference, a Somali-initiated. Anything comes out from that process will be owned by the Somali people. Okay, this government is not the ownership of the Somali people. It is the ownership of Mr. Wald Abdullah. He's the project manager of this government.
Let me get some thoughts from Dominic Helling, because we're starting to run out of time, and I do want to go back to him. You've heard there what Mr. Zakaria has said, that this needs to be national consensus within Somalia without external forces. Do you think that would make a difference if the sides did commit to it?
Well, what we have seen in the past was an immense international engagement over the past 20 years, more or less, in all kinds of different shadows, from direct intervention to less direct engagements in Somalia. And all those international interventions we have seen, either from the USA or from Ethiopia or UN forces, have always been quite a strain on Somalia, and they have always tended to extremize the forces in Somalia and to polarize between two different sides. Therefore, the history of international intervention in Somalia tells us clearly that that might not be the best way forward.
But yet, just quickly, because I'm holding in my hand here the minutes, if you like, from an AU meeting, which was only a couple of days ago. Item 15 here says it's reiterating its call for the deployment of a UN peacekeeping operation. It still wants them there. It still feels that international intervention is the way.
Right. I mean, as you said earlier on, the government is still very feeble and weak and needs international support. And one of the key priorities of the current TFG is to restore order and security. And therefore, security is the top priority of the current government. Wherefore, they kind of like to take any support they can get. Now, as our colleague in Washington also mentioned, it depends also very much on what basis this international involvement would be on, if it is a more Muslim-dominated force or a Western-backed force, can make a huge difference in that case. Yet I would join Zakaria on that issue by saying it has to be a Somali issue, and as we have seen in the northern part of Somalia, stability and peace has been achieved without international involvement, or hardly any international involvement, and the case of Somaliland clearly shows that re-establishing peace and order is possible without international peacekeeping forces.
Dominic, I'm going to have to jump in, I'm afraid. I'm really sorry about this, but we have run out of time on this show here. I want to thank all of our guests for joining us. Zakaria Mahmood Hajabdi in London, Dominic Helling, you saw there also in London, and Abdul Qadi Abdirrahman in Washington. Gentlemen, sorry about the quick finish to the show, but thanks for joining us, and thank you to our viewers for joining us here for Inside Story. From the whole team, it's goodbye for now.